before we get started, just to get a sense of the room, who's in HR? Finance? What do the rest of you guys do? Like entrepreneurs, software companies, yeah, roughly? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about driving engagement with an open culture and technology. And my name is Anand, and I run partnerships for Workplace, which is a product by Facebook. It's an enterprise version of a communication collaboration product, and we use it internally to run Facebook. And my job is to work with technology companies to figure out how can we use tech to drive better employee experiences in the company. And so these are three things I'm hoping we can take away today. We're going to blow through a lot of these because we don't have too much time on the clock. We're going to talk about how the rules of the game are changing from an HR perspective. We'll talk about how values, culture, and technology can help solve that, and how do you support culture with better software tools. Sounds good? I recognize I'm probably the last session before lunch, so we'll try and pace this fast. So it's important to realize that about 85% of all the companies that were on the Fortune 500 list in 1955 are gone. They were either bought, went bankrupt, or were sold. And this means that the average life expectancy of a company out there is also decreasing. It was, I think, 75 years, and now it's down to 15. A large part of this change is stuff that's obvious to all of us in the room. We all realize that there are new business models, software is eating the world. It's creating a set of compulsions in the marketplace that's making sure that companies need to constantly drive change to stay alive. So the question becomes, how do you build a strategy while the rules of the game that you're playing are also changing, given that the market is changing? And I think the answer is strategy is not sufficient, because when things are changing, you can't have a playbook. The best you can hope to do is to instill judgment and have a set of principles that will allow people to make those decisions in real time. And the underpinning for a lot of that is really how you think about culture. Now, the interesting thing about culture is it's easy to talk about and hard to make happen. 69% of leaders believe that culture is important, transparency is important, communication is important, but only 14% think that they have it in their company. So it's one of those things that everyone wants, but very few people manage to actually get it. And this, I think, goes back to the people in the company and what's happening internally at the company. A Gallup poll, I think this was released September 2017, said that only 31% of the employees in a company are engaged at any given time, which means 69% is just wasted, right? And this goes back to who's in the company and what are they doing. And there are a couple of fundamental shifts that we see happening. First is the workforce itself is changing. By 2020, over 50% of people in the workforce will be millennials. And as all of us know, millennials think, act, behave differently. But the interesting thing is when millennials work with non-millennials, that's when things get really interesting, because millennials grew up in a really different world, right? It used to be that the time that we spent using digital technologies in our personal lives were siloed in these little blue boxes, right? Just before sleeping, or at your lunchtime when you're eating, or traditionally after work, you got in front of the TV or internet and sort of consumed content. But millennials grew up in the mobile world where consumption of information is all the time, right? Which means that those blue boxes are no longer siloed to before, during, and after work. It's all the time, and that changes how they think and they act and they communicate. So if you look at how we've communicated in the past, it used to be that we used to write long-form text and have conversations about things that were sort of memos. Then we got visual technologies in place of photos and video, and all of that started changing how we communicate. Now we've moved on to a world where there's potentially live video and AR and VR that could help change how we communicate. So millennials are bringing a set of expectations to the workplace about how technology should operate and the experiences that it needs to power, which is very different from the experiences and technologies that they have at work today. Frankly, it's probably the first generation where their experiences at work with respect to technology are worse off than the experiences in their personal lives. I remember when my dad went to work, he used to be like, I got a phone, I got a fax. And we go into work now and we're like, oh my God, these large laptops, they're so not cool. So it's really a big difference in terms of what technologies are out there for people to do their job. So we spoke about how there's a lot of change happening outside and the implications on that to decision making. We spoke about the changes happening internally when it comes to the millennial workforce and the technology expectations having changed. I'm going to take you through our story at Facebook to give you an example of how we're navigating this. This is not the playbook, it is a playbook. Some of this will work for everybody, some of it won't, so take it for what it is, but I'll walk you through our examples. When we think of like navigating change and building a resilient organization, it starts with culture for us. And Chris Cox, our CPO, talks about this, which is our culture is a sum of the 1,000 daily decisions that each of us make. It's what we say, it's how we say it, and it's also what we don't do. So this goes back to how do we think of our values and how do we live it? And at Facebook, we have 5 values. It's building social value, it's moving fast, be bold, be open, and focus on impact. I'm going to zero in on 2 values and how that impacts our culture and how we make decisions. The first one is be open. For us, openness is primarily about communication. And the way we think of this is the company's performance is a sum of people's individual performances. An individual performance is a sum of our relationships with others that we work with, and our relationships are a sum of all the conversations and communications that we have with people around us. So if you kind of step through the logic, the driver for how we make our decisions is how we communicate with each other. And so primarily when we work at Facebook internally, we think of working in flow. This is a chart by Simon Terry, who runs change agents worldwide. And he talks about working above the flow, in the flow, and below the flow. Above the flow is like structured content, right? It's just like long-form publishing. It's very heavy. Below the flow is stuff that's hidden. These are things in emails. These are things that are happening in meetings. It's undocumented. In the flow is when stuff just happens as it's happening. It is narration. It is asking questions openly. It's being vulnerable. It's about sharing things as you're working on them as opposed to waiting for the final product to be ready. So when we communicate internally, we think of communicating in the flow. And obviously, we're a software company, so the way we think of solving problems is to write software. And so one of the products that we built for ourselves is this product called Workplace, which is effectively an enterprise version of Facebook Groups and Messenger. It's purchased by companies, and it's implemented by companies for collaborating, communicating, and working on projects. And what you see in the product are 2 things. You see a lot of groups where you can put people together and have conversations and make decisions openly so that everyone sees what's happening. And the second thing that you see is your Messenger experience where you can chat with people. So I'm going to kind of talk through some examples of how we use it to do our own work. We have over 25,000 groups inside this product at Facebook. Groups of all kinds. It could be product teams, it could be marketing teams, it could be cross-functional teams. My colleague Adam, who's in the audience here, works on education. We work together on cross-functional projects, and everything is happening in those groups, visible for everyone to see it. So I could actually go in and see a decision that's being made, let's say, in Oculus, and contribute to that decision and use the information to make better decisions myself. We use it when we get news. It could be good news, it could be bad news, and it's really transparently published in those groups. And it gives us an opportunity to get feedback in real time from our colleagues. In this example, you're actually seeing a question come in about our customer service performance and people having a conversation around, hey, what changes do we need to make? So news travels faster within these groups, and that allows for better decision making. We also use it to have company level conversations, right? Like Mark posts a poll every Monday asking people what would you like him to answer at Town Hall on Fridays. And people actually ask those questions. It's a poll, it's public, and he always answers the top 3 questions. It's a great way for him and the executive team to have visibility in real time on the engagement, the pulse of the organization. What are they thinking about? What's important to them, right? These are just a couple of ways that we think of using an open communication platform to reinforce the culture that's important to us, that helps us drive the decisions that's important to us in pursuit of our values, which allow us to navigate change. I'm going to transition and talk about our second value and how we use technology to drive impact, because sort of the focus of this conversation is twofold. It was culture and it was technology. So let's move forward. So a large part of how we think about focusing on impact is to enable people be their best and focus on doing things that they're passionate about and cut all the clutter out. If you can figure out ways to empower people without burdening them, like there's something magical in there. And the way we think about this, when you come to work, there's hundreds of tasks that you have to do every day, and many of them like suck, and it's like not fun. And like, but you have to do them because that's how the business keeps going. So the question really is, what can we do to effectively take the suck out of work, right? And so what we said was, we're going to use technology, and we're going to figure out everyday tasks that are really boring and repetitive and automate all of them in very intuitive ways and pleasant ways so that employees really don't feel the burden of doing these things. So I'm going to step through a few examples. The first example I'm going to talk about is the one that is aligned to the one we spoke about, which is sharing conversations and presenting to people how you're thinking about things and what you're working on publicly. So we have this bot. It's called the Thanks bot. The interesting thing about this Thanks bot is it works inside the group that I spoke about. And what you see in this example is Namit has posted in the group something that he's working on. It's work in process, it's in the flow, it's not finished, it's not ready, but he's excited about it. He's sharing that into the group. Simon looks at it. Simon obviously is excited about what he's working on. And Simon says, this looks great. And what Simon just did there is he called the Thanks bot, and it says, hey, thanks for turning this around so quickly, Namit. The Thanks bot does three things at this point. A, it publicly thanks Namit in the thread, so it's a reply to a post that's publicly visible inside the company. And it says, hey, Simon has thanked Namit for this amazing work. And it provides social signals and cues that says, Simon's thanked people twice in the last 30 days, Namit's received thanks thrice in the last 30 days. It reinforces the core value of the company, which is it is okay to ask for help. It's important to help people, and it's important to be open and transparent so we can all get better outcomes together as a team. But not only does it do this publicly, the cool thing about it is it goes and logs this information in our performance evaluation system. So come end of the year, when Namit's manager is doing his performance evaluation, Namit's manager can see a running log of all the situations where Namit's been thanked for having helped other people. We think of small tools like this as a way to enhance what we believe is an important way of working, which underpins the company culture. Here's another example. Like, we truly believe like feedback is a gift. Probably at the end of this presentation, Adam's going to walk up to me and tell me like, hey man, that was okay. You sucked for the most part. Here are things you need to do better. And we truly believe that feedback is a gift because it allows all of us to get better. So we've experimented with things like this. It's a peer feedback bot. It shows up in work chat, and it says, and in this example that you see here is the bot pinged me, and it asked me, hey, you worked with this guy, Luke Walsh. How do you feel about him? Like, how frequently have you worked with him? And I'm like, hey, I work with him regularly. Was he responsive and consistent? Yep, on time and clear. How was he at navigating complex decisions? And this conversation just goes. It's not a 20-page complex survey sent with a link that needs to be clicked through, then I authenticate in, fill up the survey, wait for the spinner to load, and keep going for 7 pages. That feedback process never works. What really works is when this happens inline, and it's intuitive, and it's like fun and small, and it's bite-sized. And go back to this conversation we had about how millennials engage with information. Short form, concise, pleasant, simple. And if you can design HR products around or experiences around those core principles, we see greater engagement driving core business process. Here's another example. How many of you have gone to an interview and were planning to interview a candidate and showed up to the interview extremely well prepared? Knew who the candidate was? Okay, one person. You are an exception, sir. Let me ask the counter question. How many of you felt before going to an interview that like, oh, I don't know who I'm interviewing, I don't know the person's background? Anybody in the audience? Okay, majority, right? So we have a bot that pings us 5 minutes before we go into the interview with the person's name. So I'm interviewing Luke Walsh. I'm interviewing Luke Walsh at this meeting room, which is the Red Lion on the 9th floor. I have a link to Luke's profile, which I can view in line. And I also have an opportunity to log my feedback right after the interview by talking to this bot, where I actually say, hey, Luke is a hire because he's great, et cetera, et cetera. It takes that information and puts it into our applicant tracking system. So I don't have to leave the experience to go and present hiring information for the recruiter to make decisions around. And it just saved me probably 5-10 minutes and a lot of panic, or at least the first 5 minutes of the interview being embarrassed, trying to look at the person's profile and trying to figure out the questions. So all of that is just out the window, and I get the information before I walk in. Small things like this, they don't seem like it's a big deal, but it takes the stress out of the employee experience when they are in moments where they need to do their work. But it's not just about software experiences that get better, right? It's also about physical experiences that get better. Here's another example. We have a lobby bot. So when one of you guys check in at a Facebook lobby, we get a ping that says like, hey, Tom Elliott is here to see you. And I can respond back, which will then relay the message back to our lobby security, and then Tom will know that I'm on my way to pick him up. Compare that to being in a meeting and Tom's there, Tom's trying to call you saying I'm at the lobby, and you're in the middle of this conference call, they're trying to wrap up, and you're like fumbling between your devices and trying to have a conversation with Tom saying you're going to be there. Gone. All of that's just gone, right? Here's another example, and this is sort of my personal one. This goes back to tying back into the physical spaces and devices that we have. When we want to schedule meetings, actually, let me just step back. How many of you folks have ever enjoyed scheduling meetings with others, coordinating calendars, finding meeting rooms? It's one of those things that's really boring and it sucks, right? So the way we've done it is, this is a bot called the Meeting Bot, and here I'm having a conversation with Dan, and I'm like, hey, Dan, when are you back from Canada? We need to meet. Dan's not online because he's obviously in Canada in a different time zone. He doesn't need to see this message. What I do is I invoke the File a Meeting bot. The File a Meeting bot runs off, figures out Dan's availability based on his time zones, figures out my availability based on my time zones, figures out meeting rooms that are open at those time zones, and presents me with 3 options saying like, hey, you could meet Dan on Thursday, April 19th at 3:30, or you could meet him on Friday, April 20th at 10 a.m. or at 12:30. What would you like to do? And I can respond back to this bot by saying, hey, hash file a meeting, hash option 1. Boom, done. At that point, the bot's already gone and scheduled all of this stuff. It's put it in Dan's Outlook calendar. It's put it in my Outlook calendar. It's blocked the room, over, right? What would have taken opening up each of our Outlooks, seeing availabilities, looking at meeting rooms, that's all gone, right? So there are ways to make the employee experience better with technology that allows the employees to focus on what's important and get to the outcomes that they want to get to. And I don't think we're alone in being able to achieve these outcomes. We've actually productized a lot of this technology and given it to partners and customers in the world out there. This is an example from a hospital in Singapore. What this is called an acronym bot. As you can understand, like hospitals are places where emergency situations occur all the time. Hospitals are also situations where there's a lot of staff rotating through the hospital in shifts. And it's also a place where there's a lot of churn. One of the organizations that has access to this tech built for themselves an acronym bot for new employees who probably are lost when they show up at work, and they're in meetings and they hear their colleagues talk about stuff, and most of these words just don't make sense. Like, if I joined this hospital, I would not know what GBR is or DCH is or HVRSS is. It's really hard to keep track of all the acronyms when you're in the middle of this meeting. As a new employee, it's intimidating. So what you can do as a new employee is talk to this acronym bot, and let's say this Adam says GBR, and I'm like, I don't want to be embarrassed, so I'm going to go to this bot and type in GBR, and the bot's going to tell me back what GBR is. And you can go through this flow of finding out information that you don't know, which you as a new employee do not have access to or wouldn't know where to go, and you're probably too embarrassed to go ask somebody. That's another example of how people are starting to figure out ways to use technology to simplify things for employees. The previous session up here was about AI, and I thought it was really interesting. And the key difference that I noticed in how AI is thought of or how AI is perceived is there are two kinds of AI. Have you guys heard about general purpose AI and specific purpose AI? Anybody know the difference? One person. General purpose AI is like human intelligence. It can perceive nuance, it can perceive judgment, it can listen to music and be able to say what it sounds like. We're light years away from making that happen. We're probably at a stage where if we clap our hands, we want the lights to switch off. That's specific AI. AI trained to do something very, very specific, very constrained with limited experiences. And when we think of technologies that drive better decision making, we think of specific AI more than general AI because specific AI works, it's available today, and you can actually make meaningful experiences for employees and improve things for them as opposed to general purpose AI. So just to wrap up, we packed a lot in the 25, 30 minutes that we've been together. And the key messages really are there is a big change that's happening as we speak on how organizations are run. It used to be top-down, hierarchical. We said there are employees, there were positions, you had sandboxes to play in, things were closed, there were processes, it was rigid. When there is change, it's hard to play with a fixed set of rules. And what that is changing to is a bottom-up approach that's a community of people with passions, where things and information is more open, where conversations are more flexible and agile, and you're enabling employees to make judgment calls to achieve the outcomes that are in service of the company's values and the company's mission. And the key question, if you are an HR professional in the room, is how can you use your values and software to serve getting to these outcomes? And if you're building software, then the key question is how can you think of specific AI and simple nuanced experiences to make it better for employees at work, effectively taking the suck out of work. AI or technology is not going to solve a broken culture, but it will definitely help make things better if we have the right culture in place. I'm happy to take questions. I will be around at the back of the room, but thank you so much, and have a great rest of the conference.